Good morning, everybody. I'm Olga Atamanova. Welcome to Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform. Briefly about our today's schedule. At 12:30, we'll have fighters from Kostuy-Kalinovsky battalions from Belarus, Vadim Kalinchuk and Yan Melnikov. At 2:30 p.m. we'll have Alexander Motuzyanek with us, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, who will tell us about the situation on the front. And at 3 p.m. we'll have Lyudmila Denisova. She is the Ukrainian Parliament's Ombudsman for Human Rights, and we'll discuss with Ms. Denisova violations of human rights on occupied territories and release of prisoners of war. And right now we have Mykola Solsky with us, the Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food sector of Ukraine. Mr. Solsky, you're welcome. Can you hear us? Yes. Good morning. I can hear you. Good morning. Mr. Solsky, could you please tell us about the sowing campaign in the wartime and the food crisis caused by the Russian aggression? In spite of all those circumstances, the sowing campaign in Ukraine is going in quite an active way. There are clearly some difficulties. First of all, they are about logistics. And what is the nature of those difficulties? Farmers and agrarian companies spend less time for basic items now. Basic items they were used to, for example, for sowing material, but that decrease has not been really critical. They have less money for herbicides. They are also trying to save as much as possible, take into account problems with diesel fuel. And of course, there are problems with timing because there was a curfew and it's about movement of vehicles. Some vehicles have left for the front, especially like trucks and truck cars. Also fewer people there because some of them are at the front. Also, there are more difficulties because of storage problems, storage of fuel. Everybody understands those. So there are several consequences. First of all, it takes more time than usually to sow crops. Second, of course, its quality is not as high as it was in previous years. We see that the lag, the delay against the last year's sowing campaign depends on crops and region, but it's 20 to 30%, 20 to 30% against the last year, the delay. In addition to those problems, also weather causes some adjustments because it's colder this year than it was last year, so the sowing campaign moves a bit later time. One can also note several trends as follows. First, the main spring crop is corn, and its volume is decreasing in two aspects. First of all, farmers try to save money and they sow cheaper crops like spring wheat. Second, they switch to crops which were approximately the same crops. They provide less per hectare, but 1 ton price is higher. For example, we see that some areas planned for crops have now switched to sunflower and soya. Soybeans. These are probably the most important things which are most visible, I would say. In numbers, there have been about 7 million hectares. That's information several days ago. And basically, it's about 25 to 30% less than we had over the same period last year. But again, I'll repeat that in objective terms, this year, spring is colder than last year. That's in short about the sowing campaign. Minister, could you please tell us, we have all heard about assistance from the state, the government, which issued loans to agrarians. Has it worked for them? Yes, it has worked. In my view, basically, we had to act fast and to offer some mechanism. And since the decision was made in March, we proposed the following mechanisms. Agrarian companies can receive loans, and to have those, they only have to have a collateral at 20% of the amount of loan, and the rest will be covered by the government guarantee, the state guarantee. In that way, the total amount of state guarantees was, I think, 17.5 billion hryvnias, if I'm not mistaken. This is, of course, much less than agrarians would like to have, but that's always the case, and especially now. What is important, grain could be used as the main collateral. That was the difference against the standard approaches to lending which we had last year. Because we have a huge amount of grain in Ukraine, and farmers, agrarians entered into those contracts to sell it at the end of winter and in spring and to use that money for sowing campaign. But because of logistics problems, there has been a huge problem now, and in my view, it's much more difficult than the sowing campaign as such, because, if you look at the sowing campaign, then basically, irrespective of who is the minister, will it be John or Jacob or whoever, agrarians still will. So psychologically, mentally, morally, it's easier for them to sow than not to sow. They're used to work. And now they come together and they do their work. But if we consider logistics, there the role of the state, the government, is much more important than in a standard peaceful situation, because when usual logistical routes have been broken using seas, we need arrangements with other countries to eliminate various documentary, and not only documentary, but logistical obstacles. And we need to develop new opportunities. And here, indeed, the government's involvement is needed. Minister, we hear statements from Kharkiv military administration and Luhansk military administration saying that the Russians, the occupants, are stealing our grain, transporting it from Ukraine. What is the situation? Do you have information about such facts? Indeed, this information you hear everywhere. This is indeed the case. We, like most citizens, there are various channels to receive this information. There are standard channels used by more citizens when it becomes public on the internet and so on. Also, there are some standard mechanisms, standard channels of the Ministry of Agrarian Policies. We can communicate through certain authorities, certain entities under the ministry, for example, the departments of agriculture on the occupied territories, but we will not announce that information in public. Also, we interact with law enforcement and exchange information with them, and we see about 400,000 to 500,000 tons. That's what they send towards Crimea in an organized way. This is big business, supervised by people of higher levels than what we all see on the internet when we just steal TV sets from supermarkets. When they steal grain, it's $250 to $300 per ton. So this is about hundreds of millions of US dollars. And clearly, it's done also by the uniformed agencies and the military of the aggressor country, and all sorts of various swindlers, crooks. Trucks are sent to Crimea, at this season, Crimea would import the grains. In the last several years, they did not have any crops, also because of the lack of water. So now they need even more of grain for internal consumption, and also they load ships via Sevastopol. In our view, almost all ships going with grain from Sevastopol have that grain stolen from Ukraine, because there is no real logistical way. It would be about additional costs if one would bring grain from continental Russia to Sevastopol. It would be closer to use Novorossiysk and other ports. So this is Ukrainian grain. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs have already responded to some facts, and some ships were turned from Egypt towards Lebanon and Syria. Basically, when we speak with the market using different channels, we understand more or less the local traders. We understand those people who is doing it in Russia, and that information we already reported to the authorities, and we know that the prosecutors' offices have already documented such offenses or are going to document them, and there will be some international response. Also, there are some activities in place in order to seize and confiscate that grain quickly using our Western partners. But this part of activities is handled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have developed certain tools. Whenever there is a decision, they will announce it. I think that active negotiations are already in place, active discussions, and some mechanisms are being developed. Minister, how do you assess the impact of Russian aggression on the global economy in general? We hear a lot of warnings, a lot of concerns from our foreign partners about such impact, including impact on other countries, not only impact on Ukraine. So how do you assess such consequences, such impact? I assess it in the same way everybody assesses them. Consequences are clear. Another thing is that we haven't felt them to the full extent yet, because there are reserves, and some countries like China last year were very aggressive in the market. They developed reserves much higher than in usual time, in usual situation. This is one thing. Also, some other countries, for example, in Northern Africa, as well as in Near East, Middle East, they have accumulated certain reserves of grain, but a large part of them is for the new harvest to arrive. And one may hope that something will change in 2, 3, 4 months. But I verily believe that those countries will not see big inflow of new grain from Russian ports starting from end of July. In that case, there will be something like panicking spirit, because it will be critical to them. Yes, now they pay too much, but there has been the second month, so it's not that painful as yet to them, I think. But when they will see what will happen in 2 months, in 3 months, if Ukrainian ports are not unblocked, and if there is no other logistical route found, we'll hear those countries more and more. The shortage of Ukrainian grain will have global consequences. It already has consequences for all food in all countries worldwide, because there is a general balance of supply and demand, and nobody has eliminated this balance. That's the end of season, so it's not felt that much now, at least for grain from Northern Hemisphere. I think that even those countries who didn't think about it that much before would feel it, because you see, even in European countries, when beef and eggs will become 20 to 30% more expensive, and it may be like that in the nearest future, because meat, when meat is grown, they need grain. And to have eggs, they need grain. And for all foodstuffs we see in supermarkets, grain is needed. You cannot create them, grow them without grain in some form or another. So those statements those reports will become louder and louder and sharper. Dear colleagues, you are welcome to ask your questions. Please speak into the microphone and introduce yourself. I'm Vladislav Obuk from Ukrinform. Dear Minister, my question is about how and whether it works during the wartime, those usual tools Ukrainian agrarians got used to last years. I mean, forward procurement, agrarian notes, agrarian fund. And my second question is about prospects for exports. In April, we have heard a number of good news, including assistance from Germany and that ground port on the border with Poland and reconstruction of Romanian railways and reloading through Klaipėda port in Lithuania. Have there been any practical steps in those directions, or are these just projects? Are just plans? Let's go in turn. What was your first question? About traditional tools, traditional mechanisms of support for agrarians, like agrarian notes, forward procure contracts, and so on. Traditional tools either do not work or are much limited. What is good? Our agrarian market is competitive and it's oriented towards businessmen. I mean, both those who grow crops and those who buy them, the traders. This season, obviously, there is no prepayment, there is no forward contracts like there was before, because they don't know how to transport that grain. They still have big reserves since the last season. About agrarian notes, there were some nuances, but now they work. You know, agrarian notes are linked to registers. The cadastre register, there was a resolution by the Cabinet of Ministers. It will be launched in the next several weeks in a limited way because of wartime restrictions. So it has certain negative impact on all procedures about those usual good valuable tools, instruments for agrarians. Second question, what was your second question? About exports, whether there have also been any already been any practical steps to implement those projects announced in April. Look, previously we would export 5 billion tons per month, mostly through our seaports on Black Sea. In March, this March, after the beginning of this war, we just exported after about 200,000 tons. So you would have all those joint meetings with Ministry of Transport, with traders, with other agencies to simplify the documents. We started moving fast in that direction. Many thanks to Ukrainian Railways and the Ministry of Transport. They responded quickly, and now they're responding quickly to those challenges. So in April, we have transported more than I expected, to be honest. In April, it has been 1,090,000 tons, 1,090,000. How did we manage to that? It's because of approaches. You know, neither the Ministry of Agrarian Policies nor the Ministry of Transport wanted to centralize or monopolize. We didn't want to monopolize or to make it more difficult to export grain from Ukraine. It's the other way around. We incentivized all businesses to do these things, to use barges, to use railway cars, to use simplified procedures for land, or to reload through Danube ports using simplified mechanisms for the grain to go. The number of railway cars increased a lot, and the number of those barges increased a lot. We see the best understanding from Romania, and of course it is supported by high prices for logistical services. It's profitable to everybody. So in Danube there are many barges from various countries of Central and Eastern Europe, of Danube countries. Those barges have come to Ukrainian ports and they have added to the supply, to the offer. There are certain difficulties about Romanian ports about getting railway cars back from there. The reason is clear. There are many railway cars there, and they're all waiting for unloading. Everybody went there. All railway cars went there. But you have to understand that exactly in 2 months there will be Romanian winter crops like wheat and barley from Bulgaria, from Hungary, from local farmers. So there will be strong competition, and I think it will make it more difficult for us to move in that direction because of clear, understandable reason. We will not be able to ask governments of those countries, please postpone your local people and service us. It will be now. It's at the end of season. Ports are not overloaded, so it helps us. But in the summer, there will be various nuances, various developments in the Romanian direction because of that. About your other questions, I support it. The only thing is, about that dry port towards Poland. Most probably, it will be most probably about other dry ports. But anyway, we cannot move our grain rail cars to the western border because there is narrower gauge there. They cannot get to Polish narrower gauge because it's also used for passenger transportation. It's created in such a way that even our smallest cars of the smallest dimensions cannot pass Polish railways, not to mention larger railway cars which have been built, which have been constructed in Ukraine in the last 10 or 15 years. So we can just reload European narrow cars to reload grain to those, and there is not a lot of those European cars. The second part is containers, but there are also some fine nuances about volumes because there is not so many of those containers as we would like to see. Even if we use several thousand containers we use in Ukraine for grain only, if we forget about other goods, then it's just about several 100,000 tons. It has to be done, we need to do it. And there are also additional issues about ports, about Polish ports. Altogether, there are 4 key ports, Gdańsk, Szczecin, Gdynia, and Świnoujście, and altogether they can handle more or less 3 million tons of grain a year. So it's almost two times less than our ports handle monthly. And some of those ports just cannot receive grain by railways or by trucks. So there are better prospects, obviously, in Baltic ports like Klaipėda and 3 Latvian ports. Those ports have much higher capacity. They're much more developed in terms of infrastructure. Some of them are very modern and they're ready to handle Ukrainian grain, especially taking into account that they have lost transit from Belarus and Russia. And generally they're glad to help us in every way, including in this way. So, and there is some economic basis, and the main thing we are considering now, not only the ministry, but also other agencies, how to get there. Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you for your information. I'm from Phoenix TV. Mr. Solsky, I would like to ask you, currently, how much of export contracts have been fulfilled? How much percentage of those export contracts, and how they will be performed, how they will be fulfilled? Now everybody understands that seaports in Black Sea do not work. If we export grain through western border, how much will be the price increase, the cost increase of that grain if you export it through western border? Thank you. Well, it depends on the route. If you look at the cost in Ukrainian Danube ports, difference between the price of those prices for that grain loaded in Constanța port, it will be about at least 60% higher, price. How, price for corn for Black Sea or for Baltic Sea, last week it was more or less 320 euros to the best of my knowledge. In Ukraine it's about more or less $200. All the rest is eaten, so to say, by logistical costs. The same price of Ukrainian grain in Baltic ports, as you probably know, which we try to get there. What sort of logistics cost will be there? Now we will see the first batches. We'll see how it works. How long would it, in terms of money, how much would those logistics take? How much would they cost? And then we'll understand how much more expensive it will be using Baltic ports. And your second question was about performance under export contracts. Which contracts you mean? Export contracts. How much percentage of export contracts have been? Which export contracts? Which export contracts? Which export contracts? Export contract for grain? Yes, for grain. The export contracts entered into for grain. Previously entered into, you mean? Yes, export contracts previously exported into, whether they all have been fulfilled. Do you mean for the whole market, for a particular company? No, for the market as a whole, for all companies. For all companies or for some specific companies you are interested? General, total. For the total market. Look, I think that out of 20 million tons which we had to export, approximately, I think, half of that grain, more or less, half of that grain has been contracted. Thank you. Any more questions? Good morning, I'm Viktor Gatsenko from CGTN. I just joined a bit late, but I'm sure that you said something about the sowing campaign and how it goes and its impact on the global markets. Couldn't you repeat it? Thank you. The sowing campaign, let's put it this way, it's continuing in an intense way, taking into account all the specifics of the current time. We are lagging behind against the same period of the previous year by 20 to 30%, depending on the particular crop. The quality of crops has been much lower than last year, again for the same reasons. How it affects and will affect the global markets? It affects in a very bad way now, and it will affect even worse in the future, in mid-term or long-term. How much worse it will be? Well, it depends on one factor: when the war will end, and when these Black Sea ports are will be unblocked. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Any more questions, dear friends? You're welcome. Good morning, dear Minister. I am Larissa Rosa from Prospect, Italy. Do you have any information, like colleague already asked, about help from Germany, for example? Have there been any plans developed how the world leaders and the world companies would help in this agrarian sector, in this situation in Ukraine? And how we can find more specific information? For example, we know that there have been potatoes to be received, and how we get more information about that help in the agrarian sector. Well, we have a request for European Union for several hundreds of millions of dollars. It's about assistance. At least it will take certain time, so I think we'll only be able to use that assistance for sowing campaign of winter crops at the end of summer and early autumn for the next year season. This is one thing. Second, there were programs, not international programs, but lending programs, which were implemented through Ukrainian banks. There are also some small point programs, so to say. For example, Canada has been helping us with seeds for buckwheat. We had some shortage of buckwheat seeds, and because we previously got it in Belarus, but I know that, as I think in Montreal now, the ship is loaded. There are such things. Speaking about global things, about global traders or Germany, we'll have a meeting with German minister this Friday or Thursday with German Agrarian minister, and we'll see what they propose. But look, I don't expect any radical things about assistance. The key thing we'd like to get is to get some assistance in transporting our grain, and we can all make money on our grain. This is the key assistance, key sort of assistance. All types of assistance that are announced now are nothing against the fact that we cannot export our grains. So, for example, what we ask from Poland, first of all, is, put additional quarantine and phytosanitary control posts to work round the clock for our transports to move faster, and also to move those checkpoints for transit, grain transit into seaports. Those are like less standard things than, say, financial assistance or some material assistance we are used to see. These are more important to us, I think. Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you. Minister, thank you for joining us. Thank you for this extremely important information. Dear colleagues, I'd like to remind you that at 12:30 we are expecting our guest fighters from Belarusian battalion named after Kalinovsky, Vadim Kabanchuk and Yan Melnikov. So please join us, stay with us. Thank you. Bye.